This is Dr. Ted Hildebrandt in his Old Testament History, Literature, and Theology course, lecture number 18, on the difficult laws from the book of Deuteronomy and an introduction to the book of Joshua up to the taking of Jericho.
For Thursday, you guys are working on 1 Samuel, and somebody just reminded me after last class, there's a thing for Get Lost in Jerusalem in there. And the problem is I haven't set you up for the Get Lost in Jerusalem thing. And so let me check that out and stuff. We'll push that back a week, okay, for the Get Lost in Jerusalem. I will show you Get Lost in Jericho today. And so we'll take kind of a virtual trip to Jericho. You guys want to go to Jericho today? Yeah, we'll go to Jericho. It'll kind of be a virtual trip to Jericho. And so we'll do that. But the same type of technique that you see for Jericho will be the same technique that you use for your Jerusalem adventures and things. So for Thursday, you guys are working on 1 Samuel, some Psalm stuff in 1 Samuel. Do everything on that except for the Get Lost in Jerusalem, and I'll set that up for you for the following week. Okay, today is going to be another one of those difficult days where we're going to struggle with actually the book of Deuteronomy, and this is going to be some hard stuff today and things. So we'll let's just ask for a word of prayer, ask for guidance and things for what we're going to be discussing today. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word that you've spoken, that you spoke to a people 3,000 years ago, and you recorded it for us. We pray that you might help us in the 21st century to be able to get back in the shoes and try to understand what you were doing 3,000 years ago. It's hard for us, Father, at various points to understand that culture, that time, some of the laws that were made. We just really are clueless about, and we pray you might help give us as much understanding as we can, and we pray that our discussions today might be honoring to you, and that we might give glory to you, and thank you for your wonderful Son, Jesus Christ. In whose precious name we pray. Amen. Okay, we are going to talk about some tough stuff today. And so I want to discuss these laws from the book of Deuteronomy, some of the laws that rattle our bones. This is always a difficult time, and actually it's been interesting for me over the years to watch college students and to see you folks pride yourselves in diversity and tolerance. Are diversity and tolerance your two major ethical principles of the 21st century? Diversity and tolerance. And so therefore, can you tolerate all sorts of things? Person, how should I say, you use this in days gone by, things would be considered really immoral, and now, a guy sleeps with a girl, and what happens? It's just like no big deal, right? I mean, it just happens all the time. No big deal. It happens on television. It happens on movies. It happens in real life. No big deal. And yet, years ago, that was a huge deal, okay? However, in our culture, if you say the wrong things and you use the wrong words, do you get crucified? You absolutely get crucified. And so now, we're so into tolerance but yet does our tolerance lead to intolerance? And what I'm suggesting is that all this emphasis on tolerance and diversity has actually led to intolerance in various things. So for example, at the Catholic University down in Washington, D.C., there's some Muslim students taking courses at the Catholic University. These Muslim students said that they are offended by Jesus on a cross, and that, at a Catholic university, they actually have crosses with Jesus on the cross. These Muslim students are offended by that, and they want them taken down because they're offensive to them. Now, question, is this going to go to like an American court, and they're going to decide whether a Catholic school has the right to put a crucifix up? Is there something wrong with this picture? When was the last time you were in a mosque and you told them that you were offended and you want a cross in the mosque? See what happens to you, okay? So what I'm saying is that we've become it's crazy. Everything's upside down. Now, what's the problem? You guys now have to go back 3,000 years. Question, is our culture got all sorts of stuff that's changed in the last 50 years? Now you go back 3,000 years, and you're going to see law codes from 3,000 years ago. Are we really out of sync with how they think about things back then? And what happens is, the irony to me is that as Americans in the 21st century, are we really judgmental when we look back and say, how could they do those things? We're so cruel and things. And we look back on these people as barbarians and things. And it's kind of ironic that we sit in judgment, yet we're supposed to be so tolerant. Did you see the irony there? We're supposed to be so tolerant. What I'm going to show you is some things that are pretty hard to understand. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I struggle with some of these things till this day. I struggle. I'm not sure I got an answer for all these things. But they're things that I think I should put out on the table, and hopefully some of you guys, in 10 years from now, you guys are really smart and stuff. You figure it out. You give me an email and tell me what the answer is on some of this stuff. But we'll work with some of these laws. These are laws from the book of Deuteronomy that rattle our bones. Okay, they clash with our culture. They clash with our mindset. They clash with how we think about things. And some of those laws have to do with war. Particularly in the book of Joshua, we'll discuss the concept of war in the book of Joshua more, but we'll kind of introduce it here. I'll introduce some of the hard stuff. We'll actually drop it. We won't actually work with it until we get to fully in the book of Joshua. Joshua's a lot of battles, right? Joshua, the Battle of Jericho, that kind of thing. So law wars, okay? So if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 4, there's a whole section here of laws for war. By the way, are there laws for war in our world today? Is anybody familiar with the Geneva Convention? Things like that. There are ways, fair ways of doing things and not fair ways. Are there certain ways? Do we protect prisoners of war, for example? Are prisoners of war protected? In some contexts they are. Other contexts they are not. But anyways, in our culture. Here's some laws that come out of Deuteronomy chapter 20 then. It says in verse 4, "For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies." Okay? And then down verse 4, "The officers shall say to the army, 'Has anyone built a new house? Has anyone built a new house and not dedicated it yet? Let him go home. Let him go home.'" In other words, if you build a house and you haven't dedicated, you haven't lived in it and things like that, you're to go home. Is that a good law? If a person goes to war and they just build a house, where's their head going to be? Are they going to be back in their house that they've never lived in? And they're going to go out to fight a battle. Is their head going to be really into it, or are their head going to be back there? So God says, hey, if you've just built a house, you've never lived in it, never dedicated it and stuff, go back home. Live in your house, and then let others fight and stuff. We would call that, does anybody remember back after the Civil War, they had a war called Vietnam. And in Vietnam days, they drafted students and things. So I was a college student and things, and you got a number. I forget, I was in the 230s or something like that. So it meant that I was in the 230s, I would not be drafted. If you got a low number, suppose your number was 10, were you history, were you drafted in the Army, whether you liked it or not, out of college, boom. So what do you do then? Well, you get married. And if you get married, did you get a deferment? I think his name was Dick Cheney? Okay. Anyways, you get a deferment, and you get a deferment. I say that because you Dick Cheney is kind of Darth Vader and stuff. Actually, he's one of my heroes. I say that just to get in your face a little bit. Actually, you need to listen to some of Cheney's lectures, or some brilliant things, actually, despite how the culture thinks about him. But anyway, so if you have a house, and then a second rule comes up, it says there's a marriage exemption. In other words, if you're engaged to a woman, and you're in the process of getting married with her, question, are you supposed to go off to war? No, okay? By the way, what's the problem? If a guy goes off to war and his head's on his wife that's home, is he going to get killed out in war because his head's not in the war? And things. So, and by the way, even in America in the 1960s and 70s, with the Vietnam thing, was there a deferment for somebody that was married? You got a deferment, okay? A deferment that you get a year off or something like that. The Bible has it. Now, by the way, do these laws make sense to us? These laws make sense to us, and so these fit in pretty well. Not all the war laws do. Give peace a chance. All I am saying is, give peace a chance. Okay, I saw somebody smile, at least he knows. Anyways, old song from the 70s, actually, give peace a chance. This is Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10. It says, when you march up to attack a city, Make its people an offer of shalom. Make an offer when you come up to attack a city, offer the city shalom, offer the city peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject and forced to labor and shall work for you. And basically they'd be, like woodcutters and water bearers for you and things. And basically you spare the city. Okay? So this, again, give peace a chance kind of thing before. Now, by the way, when you guys read Joshua, did they ever do this? Did you ever remember reading them? They come up to the city and says, hey, peace, baby, peace, come out and stuff. And you can, it's never recorded. Now, by the way, just because it's not recorded, does that mean that they didn't do it? No, they did a lot of things that aren't recorded. And so it's possible they did this, but it's never really recorded and things. So that brings me to another point that I want to make. In the book of Deuteronomy, are there a lot of things said that there's no record that they actually did these things? Okay? So I'm saying, is it possible they had laws that they actually didn't do? Question. In America, do we have laws that nobody does? Okay, shake your head, yes. Okay, the answer is yeah, we've got tons of them, okay? And actually some of them now, the people saying, even the government itself says we choose not to enforce these laws. There are laws in the book, and the government says we choose not to enforce them. So give peace a chance. All I am saying is give peace a chance, okay? Now, those are the easy ones. This one's a hard one. It's called the Herem principle, and this is down in chapter 20, verse 17. Herem, it's pronounced Herem. It's a hard H, okay? It's a Herem. Herem. Herem means total destruction. It means, actually, let me go back one step. It actually means devoted to the Lord. It means devoted to the Lord, but how you devoted it to the Lord was by burning it up and killing everything in the city. Men, women, children, and animals. The whole city, totally destroyed. By the way, did they ever do this? Destroy a whole city? Men, women, children, and stuff. What was the name of one of the cities they did that to? Jericho. When they went into Jericho, by the way, did they spare somebody in Jericho? Yeah, Rahab the harlot got spared, but was the rest of the people in the town killed? Okay, so this Herem principle is really, really hard for us as Americans. You say, holy cow, they go in there and kill men, women, and children and stuff. Holy cow, how do you do that, Okay, is this a hard one? Is this a hard one? Men, women, and children, and animals. Dedicated to the Lord, burned up, and the various things killed by the sword and stuff like that, the animals and stuff. Somebody asked, how do you account for, these soldiers going in and killing babies, killing everybody in the town and things like that? The honest truth is, I don't know what the answer to this one is. It's bothered me some. I've got certain things, and when we get into the book of Joshua, we'll try to do certain explanations for it. But still I'm left with, this is really harsh. But what do you do? Did America ever do anything like this? Well, actually, we dropped a bomb, and did it destroy every man, woman, and children too, and things. So, you know what I'm saying? So I don't want you guys to think as 21st century Americans that you're above all this stuff and these are cruel barbarians and stuff. Actually, a lot of people got killed when the atomic bomb went off, right? Men, women, and children, everything, animals, everything, etc. Now, by the way, that's bad. I mean, we don't want to be dropping bombs all the time and things, but they did that in order to spare lives, right? Because if they hadn't done it, how many more people would have died, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to get into the justification of all this stuff. Part of it is the justification of war. And part of it is when you're in America and you're sitting in a college academic setting, question, do we in the academic setting, we're always doing what? Peace and love and things like that. Because what? Do we have to actually get out there and do the fighting? No, we have somebody else do it for us, and then we want to sit back in our academy with our brilliance and tell them what they should be doing, while they're actually the ones that have to do it, okay? Do you want me, what I'm trying to do is, do you see the arrogance of the academic position? Do you see the arrogance of the academic position? And what I'm saying is be careful that you don't think you've got everything figured out, but you never had to pull a gun and actually put a bead on somebody, okay? It's a very different thing than what you'd imagine. So I'm saying is be careful about the academic arrogance here. Now, this is really hard. The other question I come up with is, was God judging this Canaanite culture? Was God judging that culture? Was God judging that culture? Yes, he was judging. He tells it that waited 400 years. He said the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And he waited 400 years. And then, boom, he sends Israel in to do this judgment on this culture. Does God judge cultures? Does God judge cultures? Ask Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, does God judge cultures? Yes, he does, okay? Now he's using the Israelites to do that. You say, but what happens to all these people? I don't know what happens when an infant gets killed. What happens on the other side? In other words, am I a finite human being? Do I understand how the God works? Do I understand how? Can I sit in judgment on God? I was just asked, how do you justify God doing that? I don't justify God. Does God justify me? Okay? I can't justify God because I don't understand all this stuff. What happens? I know what goes on in life and things, but what happens after life? Is it possible these babies that are killed go to heaven and things are better for them? Who knows? I don't know what happens afterwards to all these situations. And so I'm saying is I can't make a judgment on that other than I say, I trust God. I trust God. So there's certain points in which you got to back down. There's certain points, and partially what I like putting these laws up there is because I want to kind of break your heads open. Okay? And in other words, to give you stuff that you can't put God in your nice little, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life and stuff. These kind of laws break your head open on that and say, wait a minute, God's beyond my understanding. I can't understand. My thing is, I can't understand my wife. How can I say I'm going to understand God? You know what I'm saying? I can't understand another person sometimes that really close. How can I say that I understand all the why God does this and how God administrates it? Can God administer things on the other side of death that I have no idea about? Can God administer stuff on the other side of death that I have no idea about? So I can't make a judgment necessarily here on God when I don't have the whole picture. I have nowhere to make a real judgment on that. So these Herem laws are really hard, though. The whole thing is devoted to the Lord, burned up to the Lord. Israel didn't do that a whole lot. They did it on Jericho, they did it on Ai, and I think Hatzor. There were 3 cities they did it on, but they did it on 3. And so this is a big deal. This is usually a hard one for Americans, for 21st century people to get a hold of. We'll talk about it. We'll come back to the Herem when we actually see it in Joshua. Joshua will actually implement it, so we'll come back to that one. That's a tough one. Now, other laws that rattle our bones. Rape laws. The Bible actually has some laws on rape in chapter 22, verse 23. And let me just kind of summarize these verses then. The Bible made a distinction between a rape in the city and the rape in the field. Whenever you get these rape kind of situations, do you always get like a he said, she said kind of thing? No, it was consensual. It was consensual. She consented. She said, I didn't consent. And so you got this, was it consensual? Was it not consensual? Was it, and you have these big debates. Do you know just recently that guy from the IMF, right? The guy from the IMF, I think he was running for a position in France. Are you aware of this? There's a France story. He was running for a position in France, and they got him in New York City. This woman comes in who was a cleaner, apparently says that he molested her, or was going after her or something, and so he was put in jail in New York City. And then, by the way, the election was held in France, right? And then after the election was held, what did the woman do? She dropped all the charges. Does anybody say, that sounds a little bit fishy? Would people put somebody up to something like that? Okay, so are these issues complex even to this day? I'm not trying to make an excuse for this guy. I'm not saying whether he's innocent or guilty, but I'm saying, does it smell fishy? Okay, all the charges get dropped right after he can't go to the election and stuff, and you just wonder about this stuff. All I'm saying is complicated. They say in the city, a woman's responsibility was that if she's being raped, she's responsible to scream. She's responsible to scream. What happens when she screams? People come and help her. She's responsible to scream if she's in the city and she's being raped. She's responsible to scream. What's the problem out in the country, in the field? She screams, nobody's there, so it doesn't matter. And so in the field, how should I say, it isn't going to make any difference, and so she's not required, to scream. She can scream all she wants. Nobody's going to hear her out in the field. So it made that distinction, okay? Now, are there a host of other things we say, well, if I were doing it, I would do it this way. This is the way they did it as far as the city and she was required to scream to show non-consent and stuff in the field. It's basically she was violated. Of course, afterwards you just take a DNA check and then you can check what the deal is. Okay, you understand? No DNA back then. On this kind of stuff. So, but they do have these laws. Death penalty laws. This is another one if you've ever written papers for your high school teachers on do you agree with the death penalty or not? And of course in Massachusetts, these things are long gone. Places like Texas or Florida, they still do the death penalty till this day. And then people freak out on it depending on all sorts of situations. So, death penalty, how do they handle it in biblical times? False prophet. It says, Deuteronomy chapter 13:10, if the guy is a false prophet, he is to be put to death. If the guy is a false prophet, he's to be put to death. Now, I want you to ask a question about this. You guys have read quite a bit of the Bible now. You haven't read the prophets yet, though. In Israel, when they had false prophets, did they usually put them to death or did they usually applaud them? Yeah, they usually applauded them. So while Deuteronomy says false prophets were put to death, usually the false prophets were the ones that were congratulated, and everybody loved the false prophets because the false prophets said peace, peace, love, harmony, and stuff. The true prophets said repent, God's going to judge you. People didn't like that. So actually in the Old Testament, what happened to the true prophets? Did the true prophets get butchered? Yeah, and the false prophets. So what I'm trying to say is there dissonance between what the laws of Deuteronomy said and what Israel practiced? But I ask you, in America, is there a divergence between the laws and what gets practiced? Yeah, okay. False prophets, Israel didn't do this, okay? They should have done this according to the law, but they didn't do it. Now, and I want to ask another question. Should they have done this, or is there another way of looking at these death penalty laws? And so I want to ask that question. We're going to come back to that in a second. But let me just put some other ones up here. An idolater. A person that's an idolater is supposed to be put to death. What's the problem with this? The guy's an idolater. He's supposed to be put to death. Were some of their kings idolaters? Yeah, some of their kings. The guy's name is Manasseh, okay? Or if you don't like Manasseh, you could do Ahab the Arab and his wife Jezebel, okay? So you've got idolaters, okay, were to be put to death. Again, did Israel put idolaters to death? Some of their kings were idolaters. And so, I'm saying these laws here don't seem to be followed too well in Israel. Now, here's some that get harder. Check this one out. A rebellious son. A rebellious son is to be put to death. You say, Hildebrandt, you'd be a dead man. That's true. That's true. Okay. Much to my shame. Okay. A rebellious son was to be put to death. You say, holy cow, put to death for rebelling against your parents? By the way, isn't our culture built on rebellion with parents? Because parents are what? They're fools. They're for a previous generation. They know nothing. They know nothing because they're not with it. Your parent doesn't even have a stinking iPhone, many of them. How can they know anything about life or something? They're not on Facebook. So, sorry. Okay. What I'm saying, that was terrible because Facebook gets a little bit too personal, right? Anyways, I crossed the line there. I did it on purpose and things, but anyways, my kids told me to stay off Facebook, but anyways.
You have?
No, they've told me to stay off, and I take their advice. I want to go back to this. You say death penalty for these things. I asked my son-in-law now, he's a University of Chicago lawyer. He graduated from the University of Chicago's law school. He works for the Heritage Center down in Washington, D.C. It's a think tank down there, and he works with the Supreme Court. He actually knows some of the Supreme Court people, works with the Supreme Court. He's actually been before Congress and had to, when Sotomayor was going before those things, he actually gave information and stuff to the Congress and stuff. So this guy knows law. He's taught law. What's that crazy school in Cleveland? It's like Case Western or something. Anyways, he taught at Case Western, and he's taught law at other schools and things. So I asked him about these death laws, and I said, it really seems, I can't understand these death laws. They're really rebellious son and things. Let me hit another one just to get even more. The non-virgin that marries. You say, holy cow, half our culture would be out. A non-virgin that marries was to be put to death and things. And what Robert told me, and I think this is really actually a good piece of wisdom from him, that he's saying that a lot of times law codes are not meant necessarily to be actually implemented, but that the law codes themselves are establishing a set of values. In other words, they're sanctioning values, saying these things are a rebellious son. What is the value that is sanctioning? It actually goes back to the Ten Commandments, which says what? Honor your father and your mother. Honor your father and your mother. By the way, is that one of the basics of society? And so what he's suggesting is then that this has to do not with necessarily that these things need to be implemented, but that they suggest the values that God has and the value of how strongly he objects to something. Now, does that help you? Do you see the switch there? From, this is what you need to implement versus these are values, a series of values that are being inculcated here. And he suggests that law in general, the big question of law, is oftentimes to inculcate a certain set of values. And to be honest with you, that makes sense to me. Now, question, does it totally solve the problem for me? No, but it helps me, and I'm about 80% or 70% helped, okay? And so there's still some stuff I wonder, but it has helped me and stuff. Hannah?
How does it mean anything if it's not enforced?
Pardon?
How does it instill values if it's not?
Okay, that's exactly the point. That she's saying, how does it mean anything? Then it becomes meaningless if it's not enforced. And that's exactly what Robert's saying is no. You're thinking enforcement with the law. He's saying no, that the law itself is meant to be a statement of social values and saying that these are things that really you need at the core values of your culture. And so each culture has its laws, not always necessarily meaning that the laws are going to be implemented just the way they are in the law books, but that they state what a culture values and what a culture disvalues. And so what I'm saying is that the whole concept of how we think about law needs to shift. And I think, I don't know, it was helpful for me. So what he ends up doing is saying that laws as values signals, that they signal values, not just as moral legal codes. And I'm afraid that how I was thinking about it was clearly moral legal code, and what Robert's done is pushed me back up to the social values. Now, question, I think Hannah has something there too. Does something bother you? Something still want to see it as legal code because it's kind of written in that way and things. So I don't know. So I'm not ready to give this up yet, but this other helps me to soften it some. Okay? So it's just something I want you to think about necessarily. You got to agree with it, actually. To be honest with you, I'd never thought about it this way until I think it was last year where we had this big discussion on this. And it made sense, at least partial sense. Now, other laws, dismemberment laws. Dismemberment laws. This is an easy one that you're familiar with. This is the Lex Talionis. This is eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Now you say, what's the deal with that? So he punches out your tooth, you what? You punch out his tooth. Okay, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Well, I'll be toothless, right? And so how is that justice? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Well, let me just say, is it justice? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In other words, what this law is trying to say is that the punishment is to equal the crime. That the punishment is to equal the crime. Now, what can happen in certain cultures, i.e. Hammurabi's code, some of the other cultures, is it possible that you knock someone's tooth out, if the person's a king, he takes off your head for knocking his tooth out? And so what this is saying is you can't overreact. In other words, you're tooth for tooth. The damage you did is the punishment you receive. It has to be equal. You can't overreact and the king say, I'm the king, he knocked out my tooth, take off his head. Okay? And some of the other cultures, there's this overreaction. If you do something wrong, there's this total overreaction. And eye for an eye, tooth for tooth says the crime and the punishment must fit each other. The punishment and crime must fit each other. So is this actually helpful in a crime that a person doesn't overreact? Have any of you guys ever been in situations like that where there's vengeance going on, where somebody does something to the person and the other person responds, and he responds harder and harsher? And then this person responds back harder and harsher, and it just gets to go up. It escalates. And what the law is saying is, no, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As it has been done, so the punishment must match the crime. The other thing with this, and this happens in America, let's suppose, I was just watching last night, it was kind of interesting. There's a guy comes in to rob a 7-Eleven store, okay? Let's say he's got a gun on him, and this guy, and there's a 72-year-old grandmother This is at 1 o'clock in the morning. Who's out talking to the guy at 7-Eleven store. The guy comes in to rob the store. You know what Granny does? This is the honest truth, man. This grandmother grabs this, the scanner thing, and she starts whacking on this guy. This guy's trying to steal the stuff, and Granny's going like this. It's all caught on camera. It's the funniest thing. She's beating on this guy. The guy steals the stuff. He runs out of the store. Now, let's suppose he gets caught in America. He stole $100, and he got a head injury from Grandma. Okay? She won. It was pretty impressive. I wouldn't want to tangle with that woman. But anyways, so in our culture, what happens to the guy? He stole the $100. He's got a gun on him, stuff, armed robbery or something like that. What would happen to him? Would he get put in jail? Armed robbery? I would hope he'd get put in jail, okay? So in America, do we incarcerate people? Do we incarcerate people for punishments? How many people are in jail in America? Yes. Somebody say that again. Is it 2 million? Is it 2 or 3 million?
No, I said 2.
2 million? That's the figure 2 million sticks in my head. Now, I'm not sure. I don't know. You're probably right. I think that figure sticks in my head. 2 million people incarcerated. Is that a lot of people in prison? By the way, does that cost America a bunch of money, actually, to keep people incarcerated? What's it cost to have somebody incarcerated for a year? Is it like over $30,000, right, to incarcerate people? And by the way, if you're from California... Anyways, okay, hopefully nobody's from California, but if you're from California, Massachusetts is a good place to be, better than California. But if you're from California and stuff, did they have so many people incarcerated in their prisons and their budget, they're in debt? Remember, California is like underwater, like major billions underwater. And what they're saying is we can't afford to keep these people in prison anymore. And so they were going to set these guys loose on the street because we can't afford to keep them in our prisons anymore. Now, what's the problem in the ancient times, okay? What's the problem in ancient times? Did they have prisons in ancient times? Did the kings have access to a few prisons, but was it very, very few? Very, very few. Joseph was in prison, right? But it was a very, very few. It was only, like the king would have a prison stuff, but it would only be for very few prison people. So what I'm saying is, when a person did a crime, could you have the privilege of putting that person in prison? If an armed robber comes in to rob a 7-Eleven in Bethlehem, are they going to they don't have a prison to put the guy in. Okay? And so what happens is they have to mete out justice immediately. In other words, they have to do justice immediately. You don't have prison-type things. And by the way, even with some of our prisons, did they ever try to do things immediately? Have you guys ever heard this, like if a guy steals something from somebody, that he actually has to go back and face the person he stole and repay, like twice, 3 times, 4 times what he stole from that person and do that? Is that actually a good thing, that he actually has to face the damage that what he's done on another person? Now, a person like, we've got major criminals like Bernie Madoff and stuff, he would face his, the people that he ripped off, and he would laugh at them. Saying there seems to be very little or no remorse there. But there seems to be something in the Old Testament where, if you stole something, then you had to repay it 4 times and stuff. They didn't have prisons. You can't put them in prison. So therefore, if they do something and it destroys your hand, then you destroy their person's hand. So it's kind of like immediate justice is meted out, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Because of the lack of prisons, they have to do justice differently. Here's another one, polygamy laws. You say, holy cow, the Bible has polygamy laws on polygamy. Chapter 21, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 15. If a man has 2 wives, and he loves one but not the other. You say, wait a minute, are you telling me the Bible approves of polygamy? God here is setting up a law, 21:15, guy has 2 wives. If he loves one and hates the other, there's a law in the Bible about that. Does that mean God approves of polygamy? No. God made what? Adam and Eve, 2 joined together, 1 flesh kind of thing, and the Scripture is very much for that. However, did people back then have polygamous relationships? Jacob, Rachel and Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, okay, handmaids, stuff like that. So anyways, what does this law do? This law protects whom? Which wife does it protect especially? Which wife needs protection? The unloved wife. And so what this law says, it says if a guy has got 2 wives, if a guy has 2 wives, maybe he doesn't have 2 wives and you're all set. If he has 2 wives, the unloved wife is to be protected. He must treat her, he must feed her, he must treat her well and things. And the unloved wife's kids, they get part of the inheritance as normal kids. You can't disinherit the unloved wife. So does this law actually protect the unloved wife? Is it a good thing in a culture where there's polygamy? Yeah. Okay, now the best thing is that there's no polygamy. But if it says if there is, and in that culture there were ifs, and so God says, okay, if there's an unloved wife, you got to protect the unloved wife. So that's the polygamy laws, and this one gets either similar to this, slavery laws. Chapter 15, verse 12. And basically, slavery laws. If a fellow Hebrew, a man or a woman, sells himself to you and serves you for 6 years, in the 7th year, what happens? He goes free. So yeah, there are slavery laws in the Bible. Does that mean the Bible approves of slavery? By the way, is this African-type slavery, where you go over, capture people, bring them over on boats, drown, have them, put them over here, and then they're a slave to a person for the rest of their existence? Is this what this is? This is saying a guy sells himself to somebody, and then in the 7th year, he goes free. Why would a person sell themselves to somebody else? Yeah, so everybody says, Join. Yeah, because basically you're debt. In our culture, we would call this what? Indebted servitude. Okay, he's ahead of me here. Let me back off. Would some people call this bankruptcy? In other words, the guy's going bankrupt. He can't afford to feed his family. So what he does is, because he can't afford to feed his family, by the way, did they have famines back then? They had famines when you couldn't run to the grocery store. There was nothing to eat. Your family's going to starve, so you sell yourself to a rich person. You help him harvest his crops and stuff. Then you get what? You get food for your family. You can feed your family. After 6 years, you get to start over again. Okay? And so, yes, the Bible has slavery laws, but by the way, does it protect the slave? It protects the slave. So this is, okay, so these hard laws? But by the way, is their culture different than our culture? Yeah, and they do things differently, and of course, they're wrong. Okay? Did you see the irony there is that we look at that and we can sit in a seat of judgment, and what's ironic to me is this, is how very judgmental our culture has become if you don't fit into our little PC-ness that we have in the 21st century. And actually, over my years of teaching, I've seen students tighten up, so that last year I asked a student, what was the most important thing you got out of the Old Testament? And the guy says, God kills babies. And I'm saying, I hope you guys get past, that your thinking goes a little bit beyond that and stuff like that. And so what I'm saying is you gotta wrestle with real life, okay? You gotta wrestle with real life and a God who's bigger than you can imagine. And you just, you gotta kind of get out of your American ways of looking at things, but okay. Now, animal treatment. This is another one that's really interesting. Deuteronomy actually has laws regarding animals. And what are the laws regarding animals? Okay? Now, these laws do not apply to cats, of course, but I have all these cat jokes and things, but they don't go over too well with certain people. But anyways. Chapter 22, verse 10. For example, there are actually quite a few animal laws things. It says this, do not plow with an ox and a donkey yoked together. Now, why does it say don't plow with an ox and a donkey together? Is an ox a massive animal? Can an ox pull a plow really well? Because it's a really strong animal. A donkey is what? A little skinny animal that, you know what I'm saying? Are donkeys good to ride on, but are they good necessarily for plowing compared to an ox? If you put a donkey and an ox together, is that a real problem for the donkey? How does a donkey do that? And by the way, is it a problem for the ox too? The ox is going to be doing all the work. The donkey's riding along. So it says don't yoke an ox and a donkey because it's not fair to either animal. It's not fair to the animal to put this big honking ox with the donkey on a plowing thing like that. By the way, does this even come over into the New Testament? Does this even come over into the New Testament? In the New Testament it says, do not be what? Unequally yoked with unbelievers. And so do you see this crazy law with the ox and donkey? So it says that if you're a guy, don't marry a woman that reminds you of a donkey, or if you're married. Anyways, okay. That was really bad. Okay, let's back off on that one. But what it's saying in actually Paul in 2 Corinthians there is saying what? Believers should not be married with unbelievers. Do not unequally yoke. Do not unequally yoke and stuff. And so that he applies this law then to that situation. So don't link donkey and ox because it's not fair to the animal. Go over to chapter 25, verse 4 is an interesting one too on the animal situation. 25:4. Do not muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. Okay, what happens? They take the stalks of grain, they cut down the wheat and barley, they lay it out, and the ox walks around on it. Now when he walks around on it, what does he do? His feet crush the grain, they've got these shucks around the kernel. The kernels are hard, the shucks are not. The ox walks its feet on it, and it basically shucks the grain, and then the people throw the grain up in the air and the chaff blows away. But the ox is the one through stepping on it that does that. Have any of you guys ever done black walnuts? On black walnuts, if you get black walnuts, you put them in your driveway and you drive your car over them. No, seriously. And you drive your car over them and it shucks the black walnuts. Okay? I'm experienced at this, okay? And because when I was younger, my father made me do it by hand and my hands were stained black. And every year I went to school with my hands in my pocket. And then we learned this trick about driving the car over it. It was really great. It was like an ox. But do you have to feed the ox? Yeah, you got to put gas in the tank. So anyways, but what's this mean, feeding the ox? It means the ox is doing work for you, and when somebody or an ox is doing work for you, do they get part of the grain for themselves? Is that fair to the ox, that the ox is doing all the work, that it gets some of the food? In other words, you got animals. Do you need to take care of your animals? Question, you got animals. Are you required by the law to take care of your animals? Yeah, they do the work for you. They get part of the take for themselves, okay? It's only fair. And so even the animals have rights in Scripture, Deuteronomy 25. And actually, I heard 3 years ago, I heard a woman do a lecture on animal laws in the book of Deuteronomy. And it was absolutely brilliant. It was just really interesting of all these laws that are in regard to animals. Does the Bible, this is terrible, does the Bible have a very high view of humankind? Yes, it does. But does the Bible also have a very high view of animals and animal treatment? Yeah, it does. Okay, so it's interesting. There's a couple laws, there's others and stuff. So, some final questions. The church in Israel, the church is not Israel, and therefore, is Israel a nation? Does a nation need laws about murder? Does a nation need laws about theft? Does a nation need laws about rape? Is a church a nation? The church is not a nation, and so it doesn't do justice, and the church doesn't have courts per se in a civil sense. And so you've got to make a distinction between Israel and the church. And so Israel's going to have some laws that are nationalistic laws that are not there. What are the differences? Israel's a nation, the church is an assembly, a group of people, and so it's different. You got to separate it. One of the basic things I look at is the underlying principle. In a lot of these laws, is their culture 3,000 years ago very different than our culture? So how do you take these laws out of Deuteronomy and apply them to today? By the way, did Paul apply them in the New Testament? Does anybody remember that don't muzzle the ox while it treads the grain? Is that applied in the New Testament, I believe, to somebody that's serving for Christ, somebody that's working for you? Should you feed them and take care of them? In other words, should you pay the person that's doing you a service a decent wage? Should you pay the person that's doing your service for you a decent wage? Just as the ox, you don't muzzle the ox that treads the corn, so the person that works for you is doing the work should get some of the rewards for that. And so it's applied like that in the New Testament to the elders and stuff of the church, that if they work for the church, then they should be paid. So you look for the underlying principle. What is the underlying principle of divorce? The Old Testament allowed for divorce, but Jesus said what? Let me hit this next one. Jesus said what about this issue with what is the relationship of culture and the expression of the law? Jesus said God allowed for divorce. Why? Because of the hardness of your heart. Because of the hardness of your heart. Does God approve of divorce? No, God doesn't like divorce. In Malachi, God says he hates divorce. But yet he allowed it because what? Because of the hardness of your heart. Now what does that mean? Because if he didn't allow for divorce, what would they do? They would kill each other. And by the way, does that happen even till this day? I just was thinking about, do you remember that case in Tennessee where this woman said that the guy was complaining about her burnt food? And so it was a 12-gauge shotgun. The guy was in bed. Bam, bam, shoots this guy in the back while he's in bed because she burnt the stuff and he said something about it, okay? So, you know what I'm saying? People, there's conflict in marriage, and if you don't allow for divorce like that, people will kill each other, and they do until this day. So that doesn't mean God approves of divorce. So you look at the underlying principle. The underlying principle is, should marriage be a place of harmony and love between two people? Yes, but it isn't always that way. And because it's not always that way, you got to make things to take realistic positions. Otherwise, they're going to kill each other. So allow them, if it gets up that high, if the noise gets up that high, allow them to divorce. It's better to be divorced. What's the underlying principle? It's better to be divorced than it is to be dead, right? Would you acknowledge that? It's better to be divorced than to be dead. And so this is, and so the law is made. Not that he likes divorce, but it's made because of the underlying principle and stuff. So those kind of things. This one's a new one. The law is a value signal. In other words, the law shows what God approves of and what he values. You got two wives in a polygamous situation. Which one does God stick up for? The unloved wife. Okay, does God protect the underdog? Okay, would that be the underlying principle? Does God protect the underdog, the unloved wife, and he makes these laws that help those people that are the poor and the suffering. And actually Deuteronomy is full of that. So the law is a value signal more than that, these are legal requirements that they've got to do this. They've got to kill the false prophets. They've got to kill the idolaters and things. It's a statement of values that idolaters and false prophets are really bad, and God doesn't like them in that type of thing. Israel is not America. America has prisons, and so we can solve some of our justice issues by putting people in prison. But by the way, is prison always... How many of you would rather have immediate justice than to go to prison for a long time? Yeah, would it almost be good to take your medicine and get it over with than to sit in jail for 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years, 10 years? Okay? So you need to think about that in terms of, how justice is distributed. And I'm not sure that prison is always as fair as we think to make it and stuff. So these are some of the things that rattle the bones. I've not got solutions for all these things. I just kind of wanted you to get, to see some of these things, to think about some of these things, and to say, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Now, contextual. Sometimes the Bible itself clashes. In the Old Testament, were the Jews to eat ham? Were they to eat lobster? Were they to eat catfish? They were to eat kosher in the Old Testament. Kosher. In the New Testament, are we told that we don't have to eat kosher? We're not Jewish. We're not Jewish. We don't need to eat kosher anymore. And in Acts chapter 15, you get this clash where Peter is told to get up and eat things that are not kosher. And God says, no, Peter, these guys are Gentiles now that are coming into the church. And the Gentiles don't have to eat kosher. It's okay. And so there's this clash between Old Testament and New Testament. New Testament then says, okay, it's time, it's time for change. The Gentiles are coming in. They don't need to be circumcised, and they don't need to eat kosher and stuff. And all God's Gentiles said, amen. So anyway, okay. So do you see what I'm saying? So there's transitions in time. There's transitions over time with some of these things too. And you've got to ask developmental questions. Okay. This has been pretty hard stuff, and I'm not saying we solved everything here, but one of the things we did solve is, that's the end of Deuteronomy. Okay, and actually, it's terrible. The book of Deuteronomy is a wonderful book. It's a book of covenant renewal where Moses is giving the leadership transition to Joshua, and he renews the covenant, and he summarizes Israel's future, sets up the institutions for Israel in the future. It's a really wonderful book, and love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul is there. And so that's a big deal. Now, what I want to do is next go over to Joshua. And in Joshua, we're going to have a bunch of maps here and things. We're going to set this up. Joshua involves the taking of the promised land. And here, you guys are going to be the country of Jordan, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, and I'm the Dead Sea. And this is the country of Israel. You guys are the Mediterranean Sea. And so the geography here, when I'll set this up. But basically, Joshua is going to take the people into the promised land. We're going to look at 3 victories, 2 problems, and then the issue with war. 3 victories, 2 problems, and the issue with war. On the nature of heroes. There is, in the book of Joshua, there's a transition in leadership. The transition is from Moses to Joshua. Whenever there's transition in leadership, can there be problems? Whenever there's transition in leadership, can there be problems? Are certain people going to be loyal to the old leader? Is the new leader going to do it exactly the way the old leader did it? No. And so there's going to be these tensions between... By the way, would you like to be Joshua? Would you... Moses was Moses the man, okay? Moses was the man. The Old Testament, I mean, this guy, 5 books of the Bible, going up on Mount Sinai, coming down with the 10 Commandments. I mean, Moses is a man, right? I mean, speaks to God face to face and stuff. And now Joshua comes along. He's got to fill into Moses' shoes. Would you like to step into those shoes? Those are big shoes, okay? So Joshua's got a lot going, big thing to fill. And so this transition of leadership in the book of Joshua, we're going to see a little bit of that initially and stuff. But what you find is that God is the ever-present hero. That actually it's not Moses, it was what? It was God's presence with Moses that split the Red Sea. It was God giving the law at Sinai. And so what you have with Joshua, now God is going to come and say, Joshua, as I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. That it is God who is the ever-present hero. And so God is going to be the leader, so to speak, and he leads through Moses, he can lead through Joshua. And so the focus of transition of leadership needs to be on the Lord. Leaders' need for encouragement. Do leaders ever really get down? Did Moses himself, Moses the man, did he ever get down? So much so that he said, God, take my life if this is how you're going to treat me. Moses really got upset and he got down and things like that. And you're going to see this happen with Elijah. You're going to see many of the leaders in the Old Testament really, really get down. Jeremiah writes the book of Lamentations. That kind of says it all, doesn't it? I mean, Jeremiah, a lot of these guys get really down. God comes to Joshua, and look what he says to Joshua. This is kind of funny here. I think this is our next point. Here it is. Yeah. Look at what he says. God comes to Joshua, and he says, no one will be able to stand up against you, Joshua, all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Is that a beautiful statement? God says to Joshua, I will never leave you nor forsake you, Joshua. I'll be with you. Okay? Emmanuel, I will be with you. But then he says, Hazak ve'amatz, be strong and very courageous. Be strong and courageous. Okay, and God is going to say this, Hazak ve'amatz, says, be strong and courageous, numerous times to Joshua. And it makes me think that Joshua was a little bit queasy about taking over this leadership. And God tells him, be strong and very courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. And then he says again, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. And then if you go down to verse 9, he says again, have I not commanded you? Be strong and very courageous. Be strong and courageous. So God says to Joshua, must be, I don't know how many times here, be strong and courageous. Apparently Joshua needed some encouragement and stuff, and God's going to give that to him. Tell him, be strong and courageous. He's going to lead his people. Now, do people compare the old leader with the present leader? The new leader? Do the people compare the old leader with the new leader? You guys ever been in a church where you get a new pastor and everybody compares him with the old pastor? This guy is, better, this guy's worse, or this guy did this way, we've always done it this way, this other way, and things. What's interesting is God himself says, Joshua, as I was with Moses, I will be with you. And the Bible itself sets up this comparison. Both Joshua and Moses split waters at the beginning of their ministry. Both of them split waters. Moses splits the Red Sea. Joshua splits the what? The Jordan River. When they cross the Jordan River, he doesn't split it, but the waters go down and he goes across the Jordan River. As they crossed water, the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, so Joshua is going to cross water. And in chapter 4, verse 14, this comes up where the Jordan River, they cross the Jordan River on dry ground. They crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. God hardens the heart of Pharaoh for Moses. Do you remember under Moses, God hardened the heart of Pharaoh under Moses? And God hardens the heart of the Canaanites. And so the Canaanites resist, and God hardens both the enemies of Moses and God hardens the heart of the enemies of Joshua. This is an interesting one. Does anybody remember? I think it was back in Exodus 17. Moses goes out to battle, and they're told Moses goes up and he holds up his javelin, he holds up the spear, and when he holds up the spear, what happens? They win. And do you remember his hand gets tired and his spear goes down, and then they lose? And so what Aaron and Hur hold his hand up, and it's like, okay, so you got these two guys holding Moses' arms up. Pretty soon they get tired, so what did they do? They end up propping rocks underneath Moses' hand to keep his spear up there. Guess what? Joshua goes into battle. Guess what he does? Holds up the javelin, and they win the day. Same thing Moses did. Hold up the javelin, win the victory. And so you get the same kind of thing. Moses did it, holding up the javelin, winning the victory. So did Joshua. Here's another one. Their victories are put side by side. I think it's in Joshua chapter 12. It says, here are the victories of Moses, and it says, here are the victories of Joshua. And they're put side by side to kind of compare the two. And it's just kind of interesting. They're parallel there. And then lastly, and this is one that's really neat too, Moses sees the angel of the Lord. Where does Moses first meet the angel of the Lord? In a burning bush. And Moses sees the burning bush, and he comes up and says, whoa, look at this burning bush and stuff. He comes up to the burning bush, and what does the angel of the Lord tell him to do? Take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. So Moses goes, whoa, it's burning bush, talking bush, okay? And what is your name and stuff? And this, yeh, I am that I am, comes out of the bush. Joshua meets an angel of the Lord. He comes up, buzzing up like that too. And the angel of the Lord tells him, guess what? Get your shoes off, you're on holy ground. So both of them approach this angel of the Lord, and both are told to take off their sandals because they're on holy ground. So all I'm trying to say is there seems to be this parallel between Moses and Joshua that's done early in the chapters of Joshua. Now, some things here. All Israel. This is a unique time in Israel's history. All Israel is together. It's kind of like early America. In early America, we're all the people like Americans, and everybody was together kind of thing. And if you look at George Whitefield going up and down the coast, and one of the great things Whitefield did was basically link the 13 colonies together through the support of his orphanage down in Georgia. So the people in Massachusetts contributed to Georgia, and the people from Connecticut contributed to Georgia. He went to Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin commits and stuff. So what you have is this Whitefield going up and down the East Coast, linking the states together. They struggled actually with their identity, but you had this kind of thing early, similar type thing with Israel. This is going to be one time they're together. Is Israel going to later on split north and south? Just like America in the Civil War, Israel's going to split north and south. And so that'll come later. But at this time when they go in, by the way, does anybody remember there were 2.5 tribes that were set on Jordan, and then the other, 9.5 tribes went into the land. But does anybody remember it was Reuben, Gath, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Reuben, Gad, half the tribe of Manasseh, they settled in Jordan. So when Joshua goes across the Jordan River, do these tribes want to go, or do they say, we already got our land, we're not going to go over there and fight for you guys, we've got our land already? And so what happens is, Joshua tells them, when they go through the river, how many stones did they pick up? Does anybody remember that? How many stones did they pick up? 12 stones. Those 12 stones symbolize what? 12 tribes, okay? Do the people of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, while they have their territory over here, do they have to cross the Jordan River and fight to take over this land? Yes, they do. And then later on, they're allowed to go home. But so this is a time when all Israel is together, and they go into battle, all Israel, all 12 tribes. And so this Reuben, Gad, and half tribe Manasseh have to cross the Jordan River to help the other 9.5 tribes. And that's something there. Now, Jericho. Why was the taking of Jericho so significant? We're coming up on some maps here that I want you to take note. Did you guys download the PowerPoints from online with the maps and stuff? So these maps, hopefully you'll get those and things. Is Jericho a big deal? You even have in America the song Joshua at the Battle of Jericho that used to be sung in schools, actually, and people now probably don't sing it in schools, probably sung in churches now, because schools don't let you sing anything like that. By the way, is that kind of ironic? Let me get in your face a little bit. Is that kind of our PC stuff? Question, can you sing Joshua at the Battle of Jericho in public schools anymore?
In my school, I did.
Oh, they did? Okay. Yeah, so some of the schools still do it. Well, that's good, okay? But you get into all sorts of trouble when you start doing these things that are quasi-religious and stuff. People freak out in our culture now. But where's the location of Joshua? The location of Joshua is critically important because that location shows you why this was such an important. It was the first place that is your first battle. When you start a season, do you guys play sports and stuff? Your first game of your first season is your first game a big deal. Your first game kind of sets the tenor and stuff. And so this is their first battle in the Promised Land at Jericho. And what's the location? Here's the location. Let me just kind of point out some things here in terms of this map. Do you see this wall of mountains here coming down? And there's another wall of mountains over here. Do you guys know what plate tectonics are? You've got these two continental plates, and the two plates meet right here. This is two continents meet here. And what happened is the plates pulled apart. And when the plates pulled apart like this, they went down a little bit, they pulled apart and down. It basically left this thing here, which is 1,270 feet below sea level. Lowest point on the face of the earth, 1,270 feet below sea level. All the water goes into the salt sea or the Dead Sea. How does it get out? It evaporates and leaves the residue behind. That's why it's 33% salt. So what happened is the two plates went apart. So you got one here and one here. So you got, this is in a canyon, 10, 20 miles across here. It's a canyon between where these two plates had separated. And it goes from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. It goes all the way, actually goes down to the Gulf of Eilat, down into the Red Sea, and down into Africa. Okay, these two plates connecting, but you can get to see it right here. Moses is going to be right here at Mount Nebo. The Israelites are camped right here. Moses is going to die on Mount Nebo here. Joshua then is going to take them down the cliffs and cross the Jordan River. You can see the Jordan River here. They're going to cross the Jordan River on dry ground, and Jericho will be located right here. Is Jericho in the canyon or on the mountains? Is Jericho in the canyon or on the mountains? In the canyons. It's, I don't know, like 800 feet below sea level and things. Is it going to be hot in the canyon? Does anybody know like Death Valley or anything like that? Is it going to be hot in the canyon? Extremely hot. Very hot. 120 down there all the time kind of thing. And by the way, Jericho has a huge spring that puts out, I think it's over 10,000 gallons a day of water. Okay, it just pumps all this water out. Question, when it's really hot like that in the desert down there, do you need water? And so question, is this going to be a really important place as you're coming across this way? Are you going to get your water there at Jericho? And then you go up to Jerusalem, okay? Do you notice that Jerusalem and Jericho kind of on the same level? By the way, how I always notice, do you see the top of the Dead Sea? Top of the Dead Sea, and it's about, 3-4 miles up over here from here, from the top of the Dead Sea to Jericho there. So that's Jericho. And now I want to just draw some things here. This is what's called the King's Highway. This is basically went from Mesopotamia down, all the way down in Arabia, down. And this is where the spice routes, they do trading of spices and things like that. They would come on this King's Highway. Okay, so this is the King's Highway. This is like, for you guys, Route 1. Okay, does Route 1 go up and down North America? You know what I'm saying, Route 1? This is like Route 1. It's a major highway. And so this is Route 1. It's called the King's Highway. And then you have another one over on the coast. This one on the coast is like Route 95. Do you guys do 95 up and down? No, seriously, from up and down 95 from here to, New York City. Always go around New York City. Anyways, but you got 95 here going up this way. This is called the Coastal Highway. And so if you got stuff in Egypt you want to transport, you got stuff in Egypt, what do? You go up the Coastal Highway. So this is like Route 95. This is like Route 1. How do you get from Route 1 to Route 95 or from 95 over to Route 1? Jericho. Okay, Jericho. Basically, this is can you cross here? You can't cross here because you hit the Dead Sea. You can't cross here. Do you want to cross down here? No, it's all stinking desert down there, so you don't want to cross down there. So you come up here, you can go across here and catch the other one, go up. Okay? So Jericho, is Jericho going to be on a key trade route? Is Jericho going to be by the way, this is what? West, this is east. Is Jericho on an east-west trade route? Not north-south, but an east-west trade route here connecting up the two highways. So this is almost like a what? Like an H, and this says across here is going across Jericho. Now, here's another way to look at it. Turn your head sideways. Okay, turn your head sideways. This is the Dead Sea. This is a satellite image. This is the Dead Sea. Let me hit a couple buttons here. Up here is Mount Nebo. This is where Moses dies, and this is where the Israelites were camped up on the plains of Moab up there. And Moses dies on Mount Nebo. Joshua's going to come down here. He's going to cross the Jordan River. Can you see the Jordan River there a little bit? The Jordan River coming down here, going to the Dead Sea. And basically they'll cross the Jordan River and hit Jericho. And Jericho will be located right there, okay? So Jericho is kind of right next to the cliffs here. And that's kind of where Jericho is. In relationship to the Dead Sea, can you see? Has anybody ever heard of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls? Dead Sea Scrolls? They're found right in this area here. Okay, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So found right in here. Okay, now, wouldn't it be neat if we could go to Jericho? Why don't we do it, all right? So, what I'd like to do next is actually go to Jericho with you and take you to Jericho. But I need to do some changing here on my screen resolution to make it look better. So just do patience here. Okay, and then, okay. Okay, we want to go to Jericho, and here we are, Jericho. Have I talked about what a tell is in this class? A tell? A tell is a mound of civilization, layer on layer of civilization. It's like a layer cake. Can you see the city of Jericho? This is Jericho right here. Okay, this is Jericho right here. This is called the tell of Jericho. Is this layer on layer on layer of civilization? 8,000 years. I mean, it goes back to 8,000 BC. Okay, so this is one of the oldest cities in the world. By the way, when it started out, it was on ground level. Can you see that it's not on ground level? This is about 75 feet high now. Can you see that it's built up? People throw their trash in the street. What happens when you do that for 100 years? The city starts going up. Okay, so that's what's happened. This is Jericho. And now what I want to do is explore Jericho. And by the way, the same techniques that I'll use on this is the same thing you guys do on Get Lost in Jerusalem. Remember you guys are supposed to walk through Jerusalem and I'll take you to Jerusalem. This is the same thing you'll do pretty much for Jerusalem. So let's go explore it. So first of all, I want to go over here. And by the way, do you see that you can, from the map, you can kind of roll over these points and you can see the things over on the side there? But let's go over here and get a view. So now you can see this is Jericho kind of from the side. If you use the shift key, you can actually zoom in, which is pretty handy. And then you can look around and you can kind of go like that and see the whole thing of Jericho. Do you see this thing over here? They got one of these gondola cars that ride you right up the cliffs and stuff. You pay a few bucks, you can go up to the Mount of Temptation where Christ was tempted on the mount. And actually, well, let's look around. Let me just show you the Mount of Temptation. Let's spin around there. There's our car. Let me back out a little bit. And then here, do you see that mountain up there? Do you see there's a monastery up on the top of that thing? Do you see there's like a monastery up there? It's a monastery. Okay, it looks like a fortress, but it's really a monastery. A bunch of monks live up there. That's called the Mount of Temptation, man. That's where they took Jesus up. Remember I showed you, take him up to a high mountain, show him all the kingdoms of the world, bow down and worship me? Okay, that's the place. Do you believe that? I didn't think so. Nobody believes that, except for the monks that are up there. Okay, so anyways, this is the Mount of Temptation, So anyways, once upon a time, I climbed up these cliffs and walked across the desert behind these cliffs for about 20 miles and stuff, and I'll tell you that story a little later when we talk about the city of Ai and Gibeon. But anyways, and the sun stood still. But this is, anyways, let's get back to Jericho. So I'm going to spin back around to Jericho. You can see what it looks like down there. Is this pretty deserty? You can see their houses there. By the way, what if you do this? Watch this. Watch it. Watch it. Does anybody get dizzy? You say, Hildebrandt, what do you want? Anyways, sometimes you can get dizzy if you watch it. Anyway, sorry. Okay, now, let's go to Jericho, to the top. And I'm going to take you over here to the side of Jericho. I'm going to take you up to the top just to look at a trench. We'll actually be able to see where the archaeologists have dug in. And this is a place where they've dug in. Do you remember how I told you about the burn layer, where there's a burn layer and stuff? Can you guys see the burn layer here? You know what I'm saying? you can actually see it. This is about 6 inches and stuff. The soil has been stained black by that's called a burn layer and things. And then if you turn down, this is the rampart coming up to Jericho. And by the way, do you see what the archaeologists did here? Did the archaeologists dig a trench? And they went through the trench and dug down and then classified all the material that they dug out of this trench. They don't do this trench stuff anymore. It's an old technique that the Germans used. I think it was in 1933. But if you go back around here and you look up, can you see that there's a wall there? And so there's been big debate over that wall, whether that wall is early bronze or late bronze or whether it's no bronze. And so there's big debate over the walls of Jericho. Have they found the walls of Jericho fallen down? The answer is some of the people, if you take Kathleen Kenyon's position, no, there are no walls there. I just heard a woman do a presentation where she said, see, the Bible's wrong there. We know archaeologically that there were no walls at Jericho at 1200 when Moses went in there, and so therefore the Bible's got it wrong. The walls of Jericho falling down obviously is a myth and legend. Archaeology proves that. And then you say, okay, well, wait a minute. Well, what about Brian Wood's study on this stuff where he shows that the walls do date from the right period of time, and so there's big debate over this stuff. By the way, is archaeology necessarily always right, or does archaeology change its mind every 10, 20 years? So you got to be careful with that stuff. But that's an example of some of the walls there. Another place that I want to go. Now, by the way, you see you can operate this, you can spin around. You see how that turns to an arrow? If that turns to an arrow, when I click there, then I go there. And so now we're up there, and now we're looking back. Those are the walls that we were looking at formerly. And so you can kind of click your way around the site. And I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use, by the way, if you don't know what you're looking at, you can click this, and it comes up and it tells you information about what you're seeing and things. And so it's kind of like goofy stuff. Whoa, script error. Didn't like that. Okay. Let me get in again. So I'm going to go to the mountain here. I want to go over here to this side here. Do you all see this tower down here? There's a tower here. Can you see it's a tower? This is called a Neolithic Tower of Jericho. Dates from about 8000 BC. Neolithic with Stone Age, New Stone Age. This thing is 8,000 years old. Is Jericho one of the oldest cities in the world? Really old. And largely because of the spring that's there feeds with water. And so here's a really ancient tower. You can kind of over here, can you see a little bit of the stones? Like how they're made out of mud stones? Made out of mud brick, okay? They make like walls out of mud brick. You can kind of see the mud brick right there. And okay, well, let's get out of here. But you see how this kind of operates then? You can look around. If you want to zoom in, you can just push the shift key and you can zoom in to check stuff out. And anyway, and then if you hit the control key, you zoom back out. You can see it that way. Then I'm going to jump back to the map, and then I'm going to go down here. And just because this is actually, if you're a tourist, this is what you'll see coming in as a tourist. You see the wires there? They got wires that'll take you up in these gondolas right up to the Mount of Temptation and stuff. Is that kind of gross? Should you walk up there? You should walk. Anyways, and just, be part of the culture stuff. But I always do this one because it's my favorite. My friend is here. And so, and you see, by the way, is he smiling? He's smiling. And you say, how do you know this is a happy camel? By the way, do you see that he's got a full nose? And you say, Hildebrandt, what are you saying? I'm saying a lot of the camels, you'll see their nostrils ripped out. You say, oh, they don't do that and stuff. It's animal cruelty. Question, do a lot of the camels have their nose ripped out? Yeah, in other words, I'm saying that I want to say, are people really cruel to camels over there? Yeah, but are camels really ornery too? It kind of is a two-way street there, but what they'll do is, I always look at the camel, you can see how well the camel's been taken care of. Look at the nose, okay? I'm sorry, it's just a goofy thing. But this guy wanted too much and stuff, and so I wouldn't let my wife go up on this one. The guy down in Sinai let her up for a ride, he just grabbed her leg, and that was all it cost me, so anyways. And then here, you come here. This is a temptation restaurant. And this is for the temptation. Remember the Mount of Temptation where Christ was tempted? So this is Jericho. And somebody just told me something really bad last hour. Wesley has been there recently. This whole hotel is gone now. And so they destroyed the hotel, which is, But anyways, it's really sad. But anyways, so that's Jericho. Does that give you a little sense of, anyways, so, and you'll have Jerusalem, and you'll be able to go exploring in Jerusalem and do the same kind of stuff with Jerusalem. And so let me get back up to my regular resolution here. And
Are we going to have to change resolution?
no, it should be all right there. Yeah, you should be all right. Okay, now back to Jericho. We're going to talk about Rahab, the prostitute, and some of the stuff going on with her. Joshua chapter 2. Let me just read the initial verses there with Rahab. She's the harlot of Jericho. And it says, Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, go over the land, go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab. Why would they go into a Canaanite prostitute's house? Question, would it be easy access, in and out? No problem going in and out, right? Question, would she know everything that was going on in the city? Like, would she know everything that was going on in the city? Would she be a good person if you're a spy? I mean, would she be a good person to talk to? Okay, so they go into, she's a Canaanite prostitute, stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. Question, is that a flat-out lie? Soon as those guys said 2 words, would she know exactly where they were from? That they were Jews, that they were not Canaanites. Are there dialectical differences in these areas that you know exactly? I ask you, I say, I'm going to go get my car down in Boston. Okay, Boston. Okay, question. As soon as I say car, everybody, no, let's do this. I had a good idea the other day. Okay, shall I go on? This is really disgusting, isn't it? Anyways, question. Do you know that I'm from Boston when I say idea, right? Or law. Do you ever hear how they say law? They say law, or they put an R in law. It drives me nuts. I can't even pronounce it. Okay, question. But if I say, y'all coming over to my house tonight? Then have I just gone below the Mason-Dixon, okay? My wife, she always used to get really angry at me because she said, I ain't learning my kids to talk like this, because we were down in Tennessee, and I kind of like the people talk down there like that, because anyways, they're real relaxed, and they can talk. And anyways, this is on tape, and so I'll probably get crucified now. But anyways, my wife is a real English major. She's a real English major, speak English proper. Lee, okay. Yeah, she's always into that. So, all right. Rahab hides the people. He hides the 2 spies, and then she tells the king what? It's really cool. She says, they were here. Yeah, they were here, but they left. They went back. If you guys run after them quickly, you can catch them. So she basically sends them on a wild goose chase. And then, by the way, did Rahab lie to this guy? The king's men. Did she lie? What does that remind you of? Somebody else who lied that protected the lives of somebody, and God approved of it and blessed them.
Midwives.
Yeah, the midwives in Egypt. This is a similar situation, isn't it? Have you got Jews in your basement? No, they went that way. Okay? You know what I'm saying? And by the way, does God approve of Rahab? The whole city is destroyed. Who is spared? Rahab. Oh, no. You don't get away that easy. Okay, is Rahab approved of God? Not only does she get spared, whose genealogy does Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, whose genealogy does this woman end up in?
Jesus.
Yeah, Matthew chapter 1, when you're going down, Abraham with Isaac and Jacob, and it goes all the way down. It says Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, is in the line of the Messiah. Okay, so is this lady kind of... Okay, so all I'm trying to say is, in war, can you use deception? In war, can you use deception the same way you do in basketball when you throw a fake? It's accepted in, war contexts. Generals try to fake each other out. Does she deceive them, and does she get away with it? She gets away with it, and now what happens? Down in chapter 2, verse 9, there's a wonderful statement here. Listen to what Rahab says. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof, and she said to them, check this out, I know that Yahweh, and it uses the name Yahweh, I know that Yahweh has given you this land to you, and that great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting from fear because of you. We have heard how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea. Did she know about the Red Sea crossing? How would she know that? Guess what? When traders came out of Egypt, would they bring that story right up, go across to Jericho? Question, she knows every, okay, never mind. But anyways, she goes across. Would she know these stories? She knows, she tells the spies. The spies don't tell her about the Red Sea crossing. She tells the spies, we know about what your Yahweh did, drying up the Red Sea. Okay? And she goes on, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For Yahweh your God, check this out, Yahweh your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Yahweh your God is God of heaven above and earth below. Question, is that a better statement than you get from most of the Jews? Yeah. I mean, that's a better statement full of faith more than most of the Jews. And so, anyway, so she goes on and stuff. She says, please swear to me by Yahweh, or the Lord, that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Chesed. I've shown kindness to you, you show kindness to me. Lex Talionis and things. And so what happens? Does God spare Rahab the harlot? She lets the guys out the window. The guy said, hey, when we come back, what do you got to do for your window? Tie a little what? You got to tie a red cord on your window that will know it's your house. And bam, when the walls go down, guess whose house is left standing? Guess who gets spared? Rahab the harlot gets spared. Is she accepted into Israel? She gets accepted into Israel, ends up in the Messiah's genealogy. Is this lady incredible? This is an incredible lady. Now, I want to show you one other thing that you miss if you don't know the geography. I want to show you what is the role of women in war. What is the role of women in war? Do women go out and say, I know Taekwondo or I'm Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, man, I can take you down. Okay. Do women do that in war? Do women in war in the Old Testament, do they outfox the men? In other words, that's what happens. They outsmart them. You just got to be aware of women's with nail hammers and pegs, and stuff. But anyways, so basically what she does is, here's what she does. It's really interesting. Now, she's in Jericho. Jericho's down here in the valley, right? So they come down the valley, they're down the valley. When you're being chased by your enemies, what direction do you usually go? Okay, let me just say, when I was younger, I grew up. Now, you understand, when I talk about gangs, I'm not talking about, you guys do real gangbangers, okay? I'm not talking about that. We had two groups in our neighborhood. One guys, they were smokers and drinkers, and we were guys that always played the sports kind of stuff. And so basically, we banged heads with these guys, okay? And so we did some stuff that was over on their turf. They didn't like it, and so they started chasing us. When you get chased, what direction? Do you always run home? Okay? So you run home, okay? So what happens here, the spies get out of the city. What direction are they going to run? They're going to run up here to Mount Nebo. They're going to run back to all the Jews where they got protection, right? If they run that direction, if they run east, who are they going to run into? The king's men who are coming back from the Jordan River. So what does Rahab tell them? Rahab says, do not run to the Jordan River. You'll get captured. Run instead the exact opposite way they would have run up to the mountains. And so basically she tells them, climb this mountain, sit up in the mountain. When they're sitting on the mountain, can they see the king's men come back into the city? It's just like you can see, you're up on the mountain, they can't see you, you can see them. When they come back in the city, then what do? You run around them and you're all safe. By the way, was that really wise and good advice? This woman is shrewd, okay? She's really shrewd, and she gives them some really good advice and spares the life of these guys, and that's how she wins the day. And so Rahab was quite a lady, and she's the hero of the story and things. Now, the Jordan River. They're going to go up to the Jordan River. They're going to cross the Jordan River. What do you know about the Jordan River? The Jordan River is chilly and cold, chills the body and not the soul, okay? The Jordan River. Let me just talk a little bit about the Jordan River. First time I saw the Jordan River, first of all, I grew up on the Niagara River. Is the Niagara River a river? Have any of you guys ever been to Niagara Falls? It's about a mile wide and stuff. It's a real river. I get over to Israel, and I go up to the Jordan River. The Jordan River, on average, is 60 feet wide, 60 feet wide and 3 feet deep. Now question, where I come from, is that a river? We call those creeks where I come from, okay? My father-in-law came over to visit us in Israel, and then we took him all around Israel, and after the end, he was kind of getting upset with me. He says, I want to go down and see the Jordan River. I go all over Israel, I haven't seen the Jordan River. I said, Grandpa, I don't want to take you down there. It's a waste. It's just like Woods Creek. It's nothing. So I said, okay, one night, let's go down. We're down. So we drive the car up at night, and I shine my lights on the Jordan River. He then really gets mad at me and says, that's not the river. He said, that's an irrigation ditch. And it's like, it's the Jordan River, and stuff. But that place, they had concrete going down the Jordan River and stuff. So all I'm telling you is the Jordan River. Now, you say, wait a minute, the Jordan River is 60 feet wide, 3 feet deep. What's the big deal about crossing the Jordan River? I forgot to tell you something. When are they crossing the Jordan River? We know when. When they get across the Jordan River, they're going to celebrate what on the other side when they go to Gilgal? They're going to celebrate a feast of, does anybody remember that? Passover. So they're going to cross the Jordan River and celebrate the Passover. Question, do we know exactly when that is then? Is it in the spring about our Easter time? What's the problem with the Jordan River in the springtime that's coming out of the rainy season? It's in flood stage. The Jordan River in flood stage can be a mile wide, okay? So the Jordan River by the way, did the spies get across the Jordan River with no divine intervention? Did the spies cross the Jordan River on their own? It can be crossed even at flood stage by, a person that knows how to swim and stuff. You can cross it. By the way, people have drowned in the Jordan River too. I don't mean to make too light of this. But anyway, so the spies got across it and stuff. Is God going to dry up the Jordan River? Yes, he is, okay? Crossing the Jordan River, was it a miracle or was it natural causes? In chapter 3, verse 15 and 16, let me just read these verses talking about the Jordan River and the drying up. Listen very carefully. By the way, when they went across the Red Sea, do you remember what it said in the Red Sea? Was there water on the left and the right piled up on both sides, like a wall on both sides? The Red Sea was piled up on left and right when they went across, not with the Jordan River. Now, the Jordan River is at flood stage all during harvest. It's the spring harvest, the harvest of wheat and barley. Yet as soon as the priest who carried the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. Do you see what's going on? Is it the water's piled up like a wall, or did the water stop flowing from upstream? And it piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam. About 10 miles north of where they crossed, the Jordan River goes through a canyon. That canyon wall has twice in history, that we know from history, has collapsed. The canyon wall collapsed and forms a dam and dams up the Jordan River. In 1927, one of those collapses happened. And this actually recorded, we've got record. Basically, the canyon wall collapsed, the Jordan River dried up. So question, is it possible that God used, it says that the water stopped up at the dam, which is exactly where this canyon is. Is it possible that God used natural means to accomplish his purposes? By the way, is it still a miracle? It happened twice in history that we know of, twice in 2,000 years. The priests go up and put their feet in it, and all of a sudden the water goes down. Question, is that a miracle of timing, if nothing else? You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying it's a miracle of God, but God could use natural means. And it seems like here that the water did pile up at a dam, and so it's possible that he used the collapsing of the walls. Hannah?
How would it have started flowing again once they got to the other side then?
Pardon?
How would it have started flowing again?
Yeah, okay, what'll happen is that the canyon will collapse, it'll make a dam, then the water will back up, and put more and more pressure on that dam, basically, and blow it out. And then it'll come down. Have you guys ever made sandcastles with water and dams, and then the water, you get enough water and the water breaks through and it overflows everything. So it was a miracle of God, but God may have used the collapsing of the Jordan. So anyway, so that's basically what we want to talk about, and we'll catch the 12 stones next time. So, all right, let's break there.
This is Dr. Ted Hildebrandt in his Old Testament History, Literature, and Theology course, lecture number 18, on the difficult laws from the book of Deuteronomy and an introduction to the book of Joshua up to the taking of Jericho.